Interior Ministry, which revealed that in May 2009, missile systems maker MBDA Italia signed a deal worth $3.4 million to supply Libya with material for bombs, torpedoes, rockets and missiles. The helicopter maker Augusta Westland signed 2 contracts with Libya in October 2010 worth $98 million. And also last year, Selex Sistemi Integrati agreed to supply gun targeting equipment in an $18 million deal. Well, the report also detailed ongoing talks with 4 companies, including negotiations that began this year with the military shipmaker Intermarine Spa for contracts worth $825 million. Well, Italian journalist and commentator AlJazeera joins us here in London. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Now, we knew that Italy was Libya's biggest trading partner, but is the scale of the arms dealing here a surprise?
Yes, it's quite surprising because we knew, of course, that we have been helping them for a while and our companies, but the network of how many companies is quite surprising, yes.
Because it's at least the report in Corriere della Sera says 100 companies involved. That is quite a big number.
Companies. Yes, not just in armaments and weapons. Italy provides high technology like this, vehicles, helicopters, infrastructure, industrial facilities, and even cattle, and it's a big chapter, cattle and poultry feed. So,
now, is the concern here that some of in terms of the arms sales there, that some of these weapons might have been used against Libyan civilians, do you think?
Yes, you know, when you have weapons, you can use the way you want. They are supposed to be used for a war, a possible war, not against civilians.
Now, Italy has this quite unusual relationship with Libya. They signed the treaty in 2008, which was ratified by Parliament, which in theory forbids Italy from using any military force or trying directly or indirectly to interfere with the Libyan government. So how much of a hole did that put the Italian government in when it came to discussing what happens now?
Today, the defense minister of the Italian government, Mr. La Russa, said that the treaty is suspended because if we talk about a no-fly zone, it must be enforced from Sicily or from Greece. So in this case, they wouldn't be able to use the Sicilian airports. So the treaty is suspended.
But so do you think, though, that originally that the slow response from the Italian government to criticise Libya was in part because they had the treaty, but also because they had such big business deals?
Well, probably because they don't have the political sensibility also. Of course, we have a lot of business, and there is a big problem. We have Italian citizens there. This is something that affects the relationship even for the United States or France, unless, and Britain, of course. Until you have taken your citizens outside Libya, you cannot shout too loud. But of course, there was a slow reaction. And then there is another problem. You know, there are the Italian companies investing in Libya, but you have also the Libyan money in Italian companies. I name only 2, Eni and Unicredit. So it's a complex relationship.
And I understand also that the head of the Italian central bank has been saying that there's concern that the events in Libya might affect Italy's growth. So do you think that was a concern, just that it was also partly that they were worried about what you were just describing? That kind of...
Italy imports a lot of oil from Libya. If all of a sudden they stop importing oil, in discussion I've heard that we have a reserve until September. But of course there is the risk that we have to pay more for oil if we don't have the pipeline from Libya.
Okay, Alessio Altichieri, thank you very much indeed for coming to talk to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, the UK Prime Minister David Cameron has met his government's Crisis Response Committee, known as COBRA, to discuss the unrest in Libya. Cameron has returned from a tour of the Middle East after being heavily criticised for his slow response to the crisis. Earlier, he joined other European leaders in saying that the United Nations and European Union should take urgent action. Well, that could include imposing sanctions to target Gaddafi's inner circle. And that's all for Europe from now, but let's go back now to Doha.
Let's take you through a reminder of our top stories now. A day after protesters were fired on by pro-Gaddafi militia in Tripoli, residents say the regime is arming civilian supporters. They're setting up checkpoints and roving patrols to restrict movement around the city. Other reports say Gaddafi's security forces in some Tripoli suburbs are switching sides. Well, much of the rest of the country is in the hands of Gaddafi's opponents in Benghazi. Many banks have reopened as the coalition now running the eastern city works to get life back to normal. And in Yemen, the embattled president has suffered a setback, with key tribal leaders announcing their support for the anti-government movement. Two are from his own Hashid tribe. Iran says its nuclear program has suffered a setback. Fuel is being removed from the reactor at the Bushehr power plant for unspecified technical reasons. Iran's envoy to the UN nuclear agency says the request came from Russia, which built the plant and provides the fuel rods. But there's been speculation the plant was hit by a malicious computer virus known as Stuxnet. In November, Iran confirmed some of the computers at Bushehr were infected. Iran says it's pursuing a nuclear program to meet the country's energy needs, but some Western countries claim the Islamic Republic is pursuing a secret nuclear weapons program. Meanwhile, Iranian state media says Iran and Syria have agreed to cooperate on naval training. Two Iranian warships docked in Syria on Thursday after Egypt gave them permission to pass through the Suez Canal. They were the first Iranian Navy vessels to pass through the Suez Canal since Iran's Islamic Revolution of 1979. Egyptian media says they were only allowed through following Iranians' assurances that they weren't carrying any nuclear or chemical materials. Gunmen have attacked Iraq's biggest oil refinery, killing at least 2 workers and sparking a massive fire which has shut down the plant. It's part of the Beji complex in northern Iraq. A team of gunmen infiltrated the refinery in the middle of the night, opening fire and planting bombs. They then fled before detonating the devices. The attack caused extensive damage, leaving the plant out of action for several weeks. The impact will be felt most in the domestic market. The refinery supplies almost half of Iraq's petroleum products like gasoline and heating oil. Jane Araf has more from the Iraqi capital, Baghdad.
This was a serious breach of security at one of Iraq's biggest oil installations. This time, it wasn't one of the pipelines or the oil fields, which is home to foreign investment. It's the biggest refinery in the country, the Beji refinery north of Baghdad. According to officials there, gunmen infiltrated the facility at 4:30 this morning, spraying the place with gunfire after they left as they laid bombs in control rooms. Those bombs set off fires that have caused extensive damage to a large part of the refinery. One engineer was killed by smoke inhalation, another technician killed by gunfire as the gunmen went out shooting. He says they're assessing not only the damage to the refinery, but exactly how this security breach could have happened. The facility is protected by a unit attached to the Ministry of the Interior. He says they are trying to increase confidence among staff who are afraid to come back to work. But in the short term, it will lead to a shortage of gasoline, a shortage of kerosene, and certainly have an impact on the confidence of Iraqis that their government can keep these installations safe.
Engineers and officials in New Zealand say at least a third of the buildings in central Christchurch must be razed and rebuilt after Tuesday's earthquake. 145 people are now known to have died, but more than 200 are still missing. Andrew Thomas reports on how the city is coping.
What the earthquake didn't pull down, machines now razed to the ground. This was Brent Smith's bed and breakfast.
There's the saying, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. I mean, I haven't stopped shaking since they started, and it's just history, you know, it's history gone.
The house was 155 years old. It was gone in an hour and a half.
This is just one of many hundreds of buildings that will have to be demolished over the next weeks and months. In the city centre, 1 in 3 buildings assessed so far has been found to be structurally unsound.
The precariousness of so many buildings makes the work of the rescue and body recovery teams that much harder, as aftershocks continue to bring masonry down. In the suburbs, different problems. One, silt. When the quake hit in a process called liquefaction, muddy water bubbled up through the ground. This is what it's left behind. Many suburbs still have no power nor water, so volunteers 30 kilometres from Christchurch have started a production line of hot food. A local helicopter company then flies in to pick it up.
As of yesterday, we flew in 12,000 kgs of hot food, hot meals into some of the poorest and hardest hit suburbs of Christchurch.
This is where the meals end up. When the residents of Burwood hear the rotor blades, they flock.
We had grilled cheese sandwiches on the barbecue the first night, so this is much better.
Because you can't store food with no refrigeration, that's this is a good proper meal.
Streets can be cleaned, power will return, but buildings and people in Christchurch are gone forever. The city will never be what it was before. Andrew Thomas, Al Jazeera, Christchurch.
Let's go back to our earlier story from Iran and the removal of fuel rods from the Bushehr nuclear power plant. Ganbar Nadiri is a journalist with the state-run Iran daily newspaper and joins us now live from Tehran. Good to have you with us. Some analysts are saying that the fuel rods are having to be removed from the reactor core because of damage caused by the computer worm Stuxnet. Is there any official word on that?
Yes, of course. So what we are hearing from the nuclear authorities here is that upon a recommendation by the Russian scientists, Iran has begun removing the fuel from the core of the plant for further experiment and technical work. Upon the confirmation by the nuclear scientists that it is safe to reload them, then definitely they will reload the fuel back into the core of the plant.
Well, how much of a setback is this for Iran's nuclear program?
Well, you know better than me that there have been delays and setbacks for a couple of years and decades now, so it is long-standing. What we are dealing now is reverse, but I'm afraid this is not just about that. This is also about a dangerous move that the West, I'm talking about the United States and Israel, are trying to sabotage Iran's nuclear program and the launch of its first nuclear power plant. Remember, the Stuxnet computer worm has a code that can help control the nuclear power plant's operations remotely. And if it falls into the hands of someone who doesn't like a success or achievement in our nuclear program, it could trigger a nuclear disaster, which is going to be similar to the one in Chernobyl. So I think they should stop playing with the fire.
We've also had more criticism about Iran's nuclear program from the IAEA. It's saying that Iran may be expanding its global search for raw uranium. Does that mean there's a shortage of uranium in Iran?
Well, of course, Iran doesn't have a lot of uranium for its to be used as a fuel, so it has every right to look in the market and shop for the shortage of the uranium. But it doesn't mean that Iran intends to build a nuclear bomb. Exactly. Yesterday, the IAEA was trying to claim that Iran